My name is Ayya Khema, and I'm a Theravadan Buddhist nun. I was born in 1923 in Berlin, in Germany, and I'm Jewish. So when Hitler came to power, I was 10 years old, and I went through some of the misery that was inherent in being a Jew in Germany in those years. And in 1938, I was sent out with a children's transport to Glasgow, Scotland, and taken in by a Jewish family there. I went to school in Glasgow. And my parents escaped to China, to Shanghai. So when the war in Europe started, my father sent a ticket for me, and I went on a Japanese freighter from Liverpool, to Shanghai, which was a journey of about 6 weeks under war conditions, and quite frightening to a young girl. In China, I was reunited with my parents, and everything went fine until 1943, when the Japanese put us in a civilian prisoner of war camp. There were 18,000 Jews in that camp, and my father did not survive. He died there. And then we were sort of liberated by the Americans, and I never forget the day when the GIs came to the camp with the Hershey bars in their pockets, and we were very glad of it too. And we were taken on converted troop transport to America, but that took years because there were 18,000 of us. So I didn't come to America until 1949, 4 years after the end of the war. And there was no way to get out of the camp except it was open then. We were no longer confined, but we had to stay there. There was no other place to go. And I became an American citizen, which was a great day in my life because we had become stateless. We had no nationality when Hitler came to power. And then I was married. I had 2 children, and we went to Australia to live on a farm. And then after some time, we also traveled a lot, traveled through India, and in the early 60s, with backpacking through India. And of course in those days we didn't have much competition of other Westerners. We were pretty much on our own, and we had the small boy with us. And the girl was already she's much older than the boy, and she was already in high school, and we couldn't take her out. So we were, my husband and a small fellow. And that's where I learned meditation. This was in 1963 in the Sri Aurobindo ashram in Pondicherry, and learned it from the mother, who was alive then and in charge of the ashram. Sri Aurobindo himself was already no longer alive. And I immediately liked that idea of meditating and took to it. We also spent some time there in this ashram. We also spent some time in the Ramana Ashramam in Tiruvannamalai, which is the ashram of Sri Ramana Maharshi, and learned a bit about his way of inquiring into who am I. He also was no longer alive. We traveled through India a great deal, and I became interested in studying Hinduism. I was 39 when I started meditating, and of course in the beginning it was hit or miss, because well, not only did I have the children and a husband, but we also had a 200-acre farm on which we grew all our own food, biologically of course, and we raised Shetland ponies. And so it was a lot of work, and meditation sometimes fell by the wayside. And this went on for about 10 years. And after 10 years, I got into contact with Buddhism for the first time. It came about through an English monk who came to Australia to visit some friends of ours on a farm, who invited us to come and meet him. They didn't have any idea at all who he was, nor did they know what he was teaching, but it sounded interesting. So we went, and he was a Theravadan monk. He taught the Buddhist teachings, and the first thing he said were the 5 precepts. And that immediately took my attention, and I thought it was something simple and straightforward which I could practice. It wasn't complicated, it didn't have any things that you needed to study, it just needed doing. And since I'm a very practical and pragmatic person, it attracted me immediately. So I got interested in that. He gave a meditation course, and I was very happy in doing that because I had been meditating for 10 years already. And I got very much interested in the Buddhist teaching, and then I came also to America to study with some teachers here. I went to Thailand. I spent a rains retreat in a forest monastery in Thailand, in one of the disciples of Thanachan Mahaboa's monastery, and I also went to Sri Lanka. Well, by that time my daughter was married, and she married quite young, and she is now 42, and she has been married for over 20 years, about I think 22 years she's been married. So there was, and she's married and lives in San Diego. So she was sort of out of the picture, and the boy was at university. He went to Queensland University, he studied electrical engineering and computers, and he's a computer programmer. And so the children were sort of out of the way, more or less, although I'm sure they didn't appreciate my gallivanting around the world, doing something they were not in the slightest bit interested in, but it wasn't really to their detriment, I don't think. My husband didn't like the idea at all. He felt rejected and neglected, and also when I started teaching, he didn't like that idea at all and thought that he would be better off elsewhere without me, which made it very easy for me to become a nun, because I didn't have to worry about his approval. He didn't approve anyway. I thought I could combine both. I could combine the spiritual path with family life. I didn't have any interest in stopping family life. I thought it was compatible. And there are occasions and there are people where that is possible. But in this case, in our case, it wasn't, because I was, first of all, I think I was too committed. And secondly, the idea of me being a teacher didn't sit very well with them. We are an older generation, and in our generation, women didn't do these things very much. I think his idea was still that it was the male that goes out and does everything, and the woman sits at home and you know, approves of these things. And I think that's what it was. He never mentioned it. But I believe that this was it. And by heart he's also very much an adventurer, and I think it was time for him also to move on. He now lives in Nepal, and he's always been very interested in spiritual pathways, but he's not committed to one only. So it's not as if he was totally a materialist or anything like that. It wasn't at all the case. It was just that I was a bit too much for him.